My name is Margaret. I am 75 years old. I need to tell you something that will shock you. For 5 years my own son tormented me. He made my life a living nightmare. But I never broke. You might think you know what family betrayal looks like. You might think you understand grief. But until your own child turns against you when you need them most, you know nothing. This is my confession. This is my truth. After my husband died, my son became my enemy. He blamed me for everything. He punished me with his coldness. He humiliated me in front of neighbors. He made me feel invisible in my own home. For 5 long years I endured his cruelty. I watched the boy I raised disappear. I saw hatred where love used to live. I felt his anger pierce my heart daily. But here is what he never understood. Here is what he could not break. A mother's love does not die. A mother's strength runs deeper than oceans. A mother's faith can move mountains. I survived his torment. I outlasted his rage. I waited for the son I knew was still buried somewhere inside the stranger he became. This story is not just about his cruelty. It is about my resilience. It is about the power of unconditional love. It is about never giving up on family even when family gives up on you. Some of you watching will judge me. Some will call me weak. Some will say I should have fought back harder. But I know something you do not know. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is endure. Sometimes silence speaks louder than screams. My son thought he could destroy me. He thought grief had made him powerful. He thought his father's death gave him the right to make me pay for surviving. He was wrong. I am still here. I am still standing. I am still his mother. This is how I survived 5 years in hell. This is how love conquered hate. This is how a 75-year-old grandmother refused to be broken by her own child. Listen carefully, because this could happen to you. Because grief makes monsters of good people. Because family bonds can become chains that choke you. But also because hope never dies. Because love always finds a way. Because mothers never stop fighting for their children even when their children stop fighting for them. My story begins 47 years ago. 47 years ago I married Robert. He was 25. I was 28. We were so young, so hopeful, so blind to what life would bring us. Robert worked construction. His hands were always rough, always stained with honest work. He would come home exhausted but never too tired to kiss me hello. Never too tired to ask about my day. 3 years into our marriage, David was born. Our miracle baby. Our only child. We tried for more children, but God had different plans. David would be enough. David would be everything. Robert was an incredible father. Patient where I was anxious. Calm where I was emotional. He taught David to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to change a tire. He taught him what it meant to be a man. Our life was simple but beautiful. Sunday dinners around our small kitchen table. Camping trips every summer to the same lake. Christmas mornings filled with laughter and too much coffee. David was a gentle boy. Sensitive like his father. He cried when he found injured birds. He shared his lunch with kids who had none. He held my hand until he was 12 and his friends started teasing him. Robert and David had a special bond. They understood each other without words. They could spend hours in the garage together working on old cars, barely speaking but perfectly content. When David graduated high school, Robert cried. Real tears. He was so proud. David was the first in our family to go to college. Robert worked double shifts to pay for it. Never complained once. David studied engineering just like his father suggested. He called home every Sunday. He brought his laundry home every month. He still hugged us both goodbye when visits ended. After college, David got married. Sarah was a sweet girl. Quiet and kind. She fit into our family perfectly. He called me Mom from the very beginning. They gave us 2 grandchildren. Emma and Jake. Beautiful, perfect children who brought such joy to our lives. Robert was an amazing grandfather. He spoiled them terribly. He taught them the same things he taught David. For 44 years we were happy. Not perfect but happy. We had our struggles. Money was always tight. Robert had back problems from years of hard labor. I worried constantly about everything. But we had each other. Our house was small but warm. Our yard was tiny but well tended. Our life was ordinary but precious. David lived only 20 minutes away. He visited every weekend with his family. The children would run to Robert first, always. He was their hero. Their gentle giant with calloused hands and infinite patience. We had traditions. Birthday parties in our backyard. Thanksgiving dinner that lasted all day. Summer barbecues where the adults talked too long and the children played too hard. I thought this was how it would always be. I thought we had years and years ahead of us. I thought death was something that happened to other families. I was wrong about everything. Robert died on a Tuesday morning in March. Heart attack. Massive and sudden. He was working on a job site when it happened. The paramedics said he was gone before he hit the ground. David called me from the hospital. I could barely understand him through his sobbing. He kept saying the same words over and over. Dad is gone. Dad is gone. Dad is gone. I drove to the hospital in a daze. Nothing felt real. The fluorescent lights were too bright. The smell of disinfectant made me sick. The waiting room chairs were too hard and too cold. When I saw Robert lying there, I knew immediately. His face was peaceful but empty. The man I loved for 44 years was gone. Only his shell remained. David collapsed against me in the hospital corridor. My strong, capable son became a broken child again. We held each other and cried until we had no tears left. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences. So many people came. Robert had touched more lives than I realized. His co-workers carried his coffin. His brothers spoke beautiful words. David could barely stand at the graveside. After everyone left, David and I sat in my kitchen. The same kitchen where we had shared thousands of meals. The same kitchen where Robert had kissed me goodbye for the last time. We did not know what to say. What do you say when half of your world disappears? What do you say when the center of your family is gone? David stayed with me for 2 weeks. He took time off work. He slept in his old bedroom. He helped me sort through Robert's things. We were both fragile, but we were together. Sarah brought the children over every day. Emma was 8. Jake was 6. They did not understand why Grandpa was gone. They kept asking when he was coming back. Each question broke my heart a little more. At night, David and I would sit in the living room. Sometimes we talked about memories. Sometimes we just sat in silence. The house felt enormous and empty without Robert's presence. I thought we would heal together. I thought grief would make us closer. I thought losing Robert would make us appreciate each other more. For a few months that seemed true. David called every day. He came over every weekend. He fixed things around the house that Robert used to handle. He was trying to fill his father's shoes. But grief is a strange thing. It changes people in ways you cannot predict. It makes them angry at God. Angry at fate. Angry at anyone who is still breathing when their loved one is not. Slowly, I began to notice changes in David. He was quieter during visits. More distant. He stopped calling as often. He stopped hugging me goodbye. When I tried to talk to him about his father, he would change the subject. When I mentioned memories, he would leave the room. When I cried, he would look away. 6 months after Robert died, David said something that should have warned me. We were eating dinner at my kitchen table. I mentioned how much his father would have loved Sarah's pot roast. David put down his fork. He looked at me with eyes I did not recognize. Cold eyes. Stranger's eyes. He said, "Why do you always have to bring him up? Why can't you just let him rest?" I was shocked. I mumbled an apology. I thought it was just grief talking. I thought he needed more time. I was wrong again. The first year after Robert's death was difficult but manageable. David was distant, but I understood. Grief affects everyone differently. Men process loss differently than women. I gave him space and waited for him to heal. But year 2 brought changes I never expected. Changes that frightened me. David started missing our weekly dinners. First 1 week, then 2, then entire months would pass without a visit. When I called to check on him, his voice was cold and impatient. He stopped bringing the grandchildren over. When I asked about Emma and Jake, he would give short answers. They are fine. They are busy. They have school activities. I began to feel like a burden to my own son. Like my grief was inconvenient for him. Like my very existence reminded him of loss he wanted to forget. Sarah tried to bridge the gap between us. She would call me secretly, invite me to school plays and soccer games. But I could see the tension it created in their marriage. I did not want to cause problems for them. During year 2, something shifted in David's eyes when he looked at me. The love was still there, but it was buried under layers of resentment. Resentment I did not understand. One evening I finally confronted him. I asked why he was pulling away from me. Why he seemed angry whenever we were together. Why he acted like I had done something wrong. His response shattered my world. He told me I was too needy. Too dependent. Too focused on the past. He said I was using my grief to manipulate him. He said I expected him to replace his father in my life. None of this was true. I had never asked him for anything except his presence. I had never expected him to take care of me. I just wanted my son back. But David was building a wall between us. Brick by brick, conversation by conversation, he was shutting me out of his life. Year 3 brought open hostility. David would visit only on holidays, and even then he seemed resentful. He would sit in my living room like a prisoner, counting minutes until his sentence was over. He stopped calling me Mom. Started using my first name, Margaret, like I was a distant relative or casual acquaintance. Each time he said it, my heart broke a little more. When I tried to hug him, his body would stiffen. When I asked about his life, he gave minimal answers. When I shared news about my life, he barely listened. The worst part was watching him with his children in my presence. He would be warm and loving with Emma and Jake until he remembered I was in the room. Then he would become reserved again, like showing affection in front of me was somehow wrong. I began to understand that David blamed me for something. But what? For surviving when Robert did not? For grieving differently than he did? For needing comfort when he needed space? Year 4 brought the cruelest revelation of all. I discovered that David was telling people I was difficult, that I was clingy and demanding, that I was making his grief harder by constantly talking about his father. My own neighbors started looking at me with pity. They thought I was the problem. They thought my son was a saint for tolerating his needy, grief-stricken mother. The truth was the opposite. I rarely spoke about Robert around David anymore. I had learned to keep my memories to myself. I had learned to cry alone. I had learned to grieve in silence to avoid upsetting him. But David needed someone to blame for his pain. And I was the only target left. By year 5, our relationship had become purely obligatory. He visited on Christmas and my birthday. He sent generic cards for Mother's Day. He answered my calls with the tone of someone completing an unpleasant chore. During these visits, he would make cutting comments about my appearance, my housekeeping, my hobbies. Nothing I did was right. Nothing about me pleased him anymore. He criticized how I honored Robert's memory, said I kept too many pictures around the house, said I talked about him too much to the grandchildren, said I needed to move on and stop living in the past. But I was not living in the past. I was just trying to keep Robert's memory alive for his grandchildren. I was just trying to maintain some connection to the man we both loved. David could not see this, or would not see this. His grief had turned toxic and I had become his target. Years 3 through 7 after Robert's death were the darkest of my life. David's emotional cruelty reached levels I never thought possible. He seemed determined to punish me for surviving his father. The visits became exercises in humiliation. David would arrive at my house with a list of complaints. My lawn was too long. My gutters needed cleaning. My car was making strange noises that I should have addressed months ago. He spoke to me like I was a child. Like I was incapable of making basic decisions. Like I was a burden he was forced to carry. When neighbors were present, David would put on a show. He would speak to me with exaggerated patience, like he was dealing with someone mentally impaired. He made me look foolish and dependent in front of people who had known me for decades. He would say things like, "Margaret, you really need to remember to take your medication on time." Or, "Margaret, we have talked about this before. You cannot keep calling me every day." None of this was true. I took no daily medications. I called him perhaps once a week, and even then he rarely answered. But the neighbors heard these interactions. They began to see me as David wanted them to see me. A confused, needy old woman who did not appreciate her patient, long-suffering son. The psychological warfare was constant and subtle. David would agree to visit, then cancel at the last minute. He would promise to call, then disappear for weeks. He would invite me to family gatherings, then act annoyed when I showed up. During holiday visits, he would check his phone constantly. He would yawn loudly during conversations. He would make comments about how tired he was, how much work he had to do, how many other places he needed to be. The message was clear. Spending time with me was a chore. My company was unwanted. My presence was tolerated, not enjoyed. He weaponized my grandchildren against me. Not directly, but through omission. He stopped telling them about my birthday. Stopped encouraging them to call me. Stopped bringing them to visit unless absolutely necessary. When the children did visit, David would hover nearby, monitoring every interaction. If I tried to share stories about their grandfather, David would interrupt. If I tried to give them small gifts, he would find reasons why they could not accept them. Emma and Jake began to seem uncomfortable around me. Not because I had changed, but because they could sense their father's disapproval. Children pick up on adult tensions even when nothing is said directly. The cruelest moments came during family emergencies. When Sarah's father had surgery, David called everyone in the family except me. I found out through a mutual friend 3 days later. When Emma broke her arm, I learned about it weeks afterward. When Jake won a school award, I saw pictures on social media but was not invited to the ceremony. David was systematically erasing me from his family's life, making me a stranger to my own grandchildren, treating me like an embarrassing relative who should be hidden away. He criticized my appearance constantly. My hair was too gray. My clothes were too old-fashioned. My makeup was applied incorrectly. Nothing about how I looked met his standards anymore. He made fun of my hobbies. My gardening was a waste of time. My reading was escapism. My church activities were for lonely old women with nothing better to do. He questioned my intelligence, acted surprised when I understood technology, spoke slowly when explaining simple concepts, treated me like my brain had stopped working the day his father died. The financial manipulation was particularly cruel. David convinced me to let him handle some of my bills and paperwork. Then he would complain constantly about the burden this created for him. He made me feel guilty for every expense. My grocery bills were too high. My utility costs were wasteful. My prescription co-pays were adding up to unreasonable amounts. He never offered to help financially, just criticized how I spent my own money. Made me feel like a drain on his resources even though I was completely self-sufficient. The emotional abandonment was complete. When I had minor surgery, David visited once for 30 minutes. When I fell and hurt my back, he sent Sarah to check on me instead of coming himself. When I tried to talk to him about how his behavior was affecting me, he would gasify me. Tell me I was imagining things. Tell me I was being too sensitive. Tell me grief had made me paranoid and unreasonable. For 5 years I lived in this nightmare. Loving a son who seemed to hate me. Missing a relationship that had once been the most important thing in my life. Grieving not just my husband but my child too. During those 5 years of torment, I developed a strength I never knew I possessed. A quiet, unshakable resilience that sustained me through my darkest hours. Every morning I would wake up and make a choice. I could let David's cruelty destroy me, or I could find ways to survive it. I chose survival every single day. I created routines that gave my life structure and meaning. Early morning walks through my neighborhood. Daily phone calls with old friends who still valued my company. Weekly volunteer work at the local food bank. I refused to let David's version of me become my reality. Yes, I was grieving. Yes, I missed my husband terribly. But I was not the broken, helpless woman my son portrayed to others. I maintained my independence fiercely. I learned to use a computer so I could email friends and family. I learned to online bank so I could manage my finances without David's interference. I learned to grocery shop online when walking became difficult. When David criticized my appearance, I started taking better care of myself out of spite. I got my hair styled professionally. I bought new clothes that made me feel confident. I joined a senior fitness class at the community center. When he questioned my intelligence, I proved him wrong quietly. I read more books than ever before. I took up crossword puzzles and Sudoku. I learned about current events so I could contribute meaningfully to conversations. When he isolated me from my grandchildren, I found other ways to show them love. I sent cards for every holiday even when I suspected David threw them away. I saved money to leave them something substantial when I died. I developed a network of support that had nothing to do with David. Church friends who checked on me regularly. Neighbors who invited me to coffee. Fellow volunteers who appreciated my contributions. These relationships reminded me that I was still valuable, still interesting, still capable of giving and receiving love. David's opinion was not the only one that mattered. Prayer became my anchor during this time. Not just asking God for help, but having honest conversations about my anger and disappointment. I was furious with David. I was hurt beyond measure. But I was also determined not to let hatred consume me. I wrote letters to Robert that I never sent. Told him about what was happening with our son. Asked for his guidance and strength. Sometimes I imagined his responses and they always reminded me that love wins in the end. I kept a private journal during these years. Not to document David's cruelty for future reference, but to process my own emotions. To remind myself of who I really was beneath all the criticism and rejection. The journal entries from year 5 show a woman who had found her footing again, who had stopped apologizing for existing, who had learned to value herself even when her own child did not. I stopped trying to fix our relationship, stopped making excuses for David's behavior, stopped hoping each visit would be different. This acceptance brought me peace I had not felt in years. Instead of focusing on what I had lost, I concentrated on what remained. My health was good. My mind was sharp. My heart was still capable of love. I had years of beautiful memories that no one could take from me. I developed hobbies that brought me joy. Watercolor painting that I was surprisingly good at. A small vegetable garden that provided fresh produce and satisfaction. Reading mysteries that kept my mind engaged. When people asked about David, I learned to deflect gracefully. He is busy with work and family. He is doing well. We talk regularly. I refuse to air our troubles publicly or seek sympathy through complaint. This dignity was not easy to maintain. Many days I wanted to scream about his cruelty. Many nights I cried myself to sleep from loneliness and rejection. But I never let David see me break. I understand now that my strength during this period was not just about surviving his torment. It was about modeling resilience for him. Showing him what unconditional love looks like. Demonstrating that mothers do not abandon their children, even when children abandon their mothers. I was teaching him a lesson he was not ready to learn. But I knew someday he might need this lesson. Someday he might understand that love is not a transaction. That family bonds are not conditional on perfect behavior or mutual convenience. My silent strength was not weakness disguised. It was the most powerful thing I could offer him. Proof that his cruelty could not destroy me. Evidence that mothers are made of stronger stuff than their children sometimes realize. I was not just enduring for my own sake. I was enduring for his sake too. Because I knew that someday he would need a mother again. And I was determined to be there when that day came. The breaking point came during year 6, on what would have been Robert's 70th birthday. I had been dreading this day for weeks, knowing it would be difficult to face alone. That morning, I visited Robert's grave with flowers from my garden. Daffodils, his favorite. I sat on the small bench nearby and told him about our son. About how much pain we were both carrying. About how much I missed having him there to help navigate this crisis. When I returned home, David was waiting in my driveway. This was unusual. He never visited without calling first. He never visited on emotionally significant days. He followed me into the house without greeting me. His face was stormy, his posture aggressive. I braced myself for another confrontation. But what happened next was different from all our previous encounters. David began yelling. Really yelling. 5 years of controlled coldness erupted into pure rage. He accused me of manipulating him with guilt. Of using his father's memory as a weapon. Of making his grief harder by constantly reminding him of what we had lost. He said I was selfish and dramatic. That I wallowed in self-pity. That I expected everyone to cater to my emotions while ignoring their own. He said he was tired of pretending to care about my feelings. Tired of visiting out of obligation. Tired of dealing with a mother who could not accept that her husband was dead and move on with her life. The words were like physical blows. Each accusation cut deeper than the last. But I did not cry. I did not argue. I just stood there and let him empty all his poison into the space between us. When he finally stopped yelling, the silence was deafening. David was breathing hard, his face red with anger and exertion. He looked like he was waiting for me to react. Waiting for me to break down or fight back. Instead, I did something that surprised us both. I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a sarcastic smile. A sad knowing smile. The smile of a mother who finally understood what was really happening to her child. I walked to my kitchen table and sat down. I invited David to join me. He remained standing, still angry but suddenly uncertain. I told him I finally understood. He was not angry at me. He was angry at God. At fate. At the unfairness of losing his father too young. But those things could not be confronted or fought or blamed. So he had chosen me as his target. The surviving parent. The one who reminded him daily of what was missing. The one who was safe to hate because mothers forgive everything. I told him I understood his anger because I felt it too. I was furious that Robert died and left me alone. I was devastated that our family was broken. I was scared about growing old without my life partner. But I had never blamed David for surviving when his father did not. I had never punished him for grieving differently than I did. I had never made him pay for my pain. For the first time in years, David really looked at me. Not through the filter of his anger, but with clear eyes. He saw how much weight I had lost. How tired I looked. How lonely I had become. He saw the woman who had raised him with infinite patience. Who had supported his dreams even when money was tight. Who had loved him unconditionally for 43 years. He saw his mother. Not the enemy he had created in his mind, but the woman who had been quietly enduring his cruelty while continuing to love him. The realization hit him like a physical force. He sank into the chair across from me and put his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears. He whispered an apology so broken and sincere that it nearly destroyed my carefully maintained composure. He said he did not know why he had been so cruel. He said he had lost himself in grief and anger. He said he had hurt the one person who loved him most. I reached across the table and took his hand. The hand I had held when he was small and scared. The hand I had bandaged when he fell off his bicycle. The hand that belonged to my son no matter what had passed between us. I forgave him. Not because his cruelty was acceptable, but because he was my child. Because love is not conditional on perfect behavior. Because mothers do not give up on their children even when their children give up on themselves. That conversation in my kitchen marked the beginning of our healing. It did not happen overnight. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt slowly and carefully. But we were both committed to finding our way back to each other. David began therapy to process his grief properly. He learned that anger was easier than sadness. That blame was simpler than acceptance. That pushing people away felt safer than risking more loss. He also learned that his cruelty toward me had been a form of self-destruction. By cutting himself off from my love, he had made his grief unbearable. By rejecting my support, he had chosen isolation over healing. Our relationship today is different from what it was before Robert died. We are both more cautious, more aware of how fragile family bonds can be. But we are also deeper, more honest, more grateful for each other. The grandchildren are part of my life again. Emma is 16 now and she calls me every week. Jake is 14 and he still hugs me without embarrassment. They know their grandfather through the stories I tell them, and David no longer stops me from sharing these memories. Sarah and I have grown closer through this experience. She understands now how much I suffered during those dark years. She also understands how much strength it took to love David through his worst moments. I have learned things about myself that I might never have discovered otherwise. I am stronger than I thought. More resilient than I imagined. More capable of surviving heartbreak than I ever wanted to know. I learned that love is not always rewarded immediately. Sometimes you must love people through their worst behavior. Sometimes you must believe in relationships that seem completely broken. Sometimes you must have faith that goodness will return. I learned that grief makes people do terrible things. It distorts their judgment, amplifies their worst impulses, and makes them cruel to those who love them most. Understanding this does not excuse the behavior, but it makes forgiveness possible. I learned that dignity is not about being perfect. It is about maintaining your values even when others abandon theirs. It is about refusing to become bitter even when you have every reason to be angry. Most importantly, I learned that motherhood is not a contract. It is not a transaction where love is exchanged for gratitude and respect. It is a commitment that transcends behavior, circumstances, and even justice. My son tormented me for 5 years. He said cruel things that still echo in my memory. He made me doubt my worth and question my reality. He isolated me from my grandchildren and painted me as a burden to our community. But he could not make me stop loving him. He could not make me abandon my role as his mother. He could not break the bond that was forged when I first held him as a baby and promised to love him forever. That promise was not conditional on his perfection. It was not dependent on his gratitude. It was not contingent on his reciprocation. It was absolute, eternal, and unbreakable. Today, David understands what I knew all along. That mothers love their children through everything. That family means never giving up even when giving up would be easier. That some bonds are stronger than anger, deeper than grief, and more enduring than cruelty. If you are watching this and facing your own family crisis, remember my story. Remember that love wins, but not always quickly. Remember that forgiveness is possible, but not always easy. Remember that some relationships are worth fighting for, even when you are the only one fighting. Do not let others define your worth. Do not give up on people you love, even when they seem determined to push you away. Do not let temporary pain destroy permanent bonds. I am 75 years old. I have survived my husband's death and my son's rejection. I have endured 5 years of emotional torment and emerged with my spirit intact. I am still here. I am still standing. I am still a mother. And that is enough.